Rome burned, though not from visible fire. It burned in its foundations, in its hidden chambers, in its marble halls tainted by invisible intrigues. It was the last gleam of the 1st century, and at the heart of the empire, amidst statues of lifeless gods and the still recent shadow of Nero, a new threat rose, quieter than the sword and more dangerous than any legion, the faith of the humble. On the Palatine Hill, where gold covered even the ceilings, a young woman of imperial blood gazed out at the world from her loggia adorned with Corinthian columns. Her name was Flavia Domitila, niece of Emperor Vespasian, fiancée to the consul, maiden of the consular feasts, and heir to one of the most feared names in Rome. Yet her eyes, gray like the ashes of Vesuvius, looked beyond the crimson horizon of the eternal city, as if searching for an invisible kingdom within the reflections of light on the Tiber. No one in the Senate suspected it. No centurion could guess that beneath the embroidered peplos of a patrician lady, a heart was surrendered not to the gods of Rome, but to the son of the carpenter crucified in Judea. Every word of the gospel she secretly read in the gardens of the Domus Priscilla was like a spear of fire in her soul. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will save it. And those words, more than the praises of poets or the decrees of Caesar, were what guided her destiny. The story of Flavia Domitila was not written with ink, but with tears, with blood, and with hope. In a world where power decided everything, she chose humility. In an era of marble idols, she worshipped a God who could not be seen, and in a time when women were mere ornaments or prizes, she became a witness, a living stone of a faith that no persecution could bury. This is not the story of a princess or merely a martyr. It is the story of a flame that was kindled in the heart of the empire, a flame that neither lions nor prisons nor fear could extinguish. And now, after the centuries, her voice rises again like an indestructible echo, whispering to those who dare to believe beyond the temples, beyond the thrones, beyond death. This is the story of Saint Flavia Domitila, the Rose of the Flavians, martyr of the faith, daughter of the empire, and wife of Christ. In the shining marble of the Domus Flavius, where fountains sang among laurels and the air smelled of incense and ripe wine, Flavia Domitila was born under the auspices of a feared and revered lineage. She was the niece of Vespasian, daughter of Domitila the Elder, and granddaughter of generals who had expanded the empire's borders to the far reaches of the Rhine. From her childhood, she was treated as a jewel in the crown of the Flavian family, educated in Greek literature, music, history, and the art of enchanting without speaking more than necessary. Her name echoed in elite circles as a synonym of grace, virtue, and obedience. But what no one saw was that in her heart there was a restlessness that the poets could not describe. At 13, while walking among the columns of the temple of Venus Genetrix, accompanied by her nurse, she asked with the soft voice she used when something troubled her, "Why, if the gods are so powerful, do they not stop the misery of slaves or the tears of mothers?" The nurse, disturbed by the question, remained silent. Flavia did not press, but that night she did not sleep. A suspicion began to grow in her soul that no philosopher could calm. The years passed, and as was customary among senatorial families, she was betrothed to the man her grandfather, the emperor, considered most useful for the clan's political stability. Tito Flavio Clemente, the designated consul, a man of calm temperament, wise in the letters but even more skilled in the art of not saying what he thought. They married at a banquet held in the gardens of the Flavian villa in Tusculum, with the presence of vestals, poets, and envoys from Caesar. Rome was dressed in finery, but Flavia's soul seemed to drift away from it all. The people applauded her beauty, but within her began to rise a thirst that gold could not quench. At night, When she retired to her rooms, she would often walk alone through the shadowed corridors, pausing to observe the niches where the marble statues of the tutelary gods stood. She wondered why, if everything seemed so ordered, the world still felt so empty. One day, while walking through her cousin Priscilla's suburban villa, curiosity led her to the far end of a hidden garden. There, in a small gallery carved into the rock, she found several women gathered around an oil lamp. They sang softly a hymn unfamiliar to her ears, but it made her chest tremble with an inexplicable fervor. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. An elderly woman with a serene face and deep eyes bowed gently. "We are servants of the one true God," she said, "the one who is not carved in stone, nor lives in temples, but in the heart of those who believe." Flavia said nothing. She just stared at the flickering flame of the lamp. It was as if her soul, at last, remembered something it had forgotten. That encounter changed her course. It was not sudden. It was like the melting of snow under the sun, slow, silent, inevitable. Through her cousin Priscilla, Flavia was introduced to the small, secret Christian community in Rome. She listened to the reading of Paul's letters in a low voice, memorized the Psalms in vulgar Latin, and asked about that Jesus who had died like a criminal but risen as a king. All of this was contrary to her world, and yet everything made sense. One night, after one of those secret meetings in the catacombs of Domitila, Priscilla took her hands and said, "Your place is not among marbles or scepters, Flavia. You have been called to serve another kingdom. Do you feel it?" She lowered her head. She did not cry, but responded with a whisper louder than any shout, "I know, and I am afraid." "Fear is the threshold of faith," Priscilla replied. "Do not fear becoming what you already are." From that moment on, Flavia lived in two worlds. By day, she presented herself as the wife of the consul, hostess of banquets, and a measured voice in domestic debates. But by night, in silence, she wrote with charcoal on tablets the words of the gospel, recited the Our Father while looking at the stars, and closed her eyes imploring that invisible God to sustain her in what was to come. And though she did not yet know it, that path, made of secrecy, fire, and surrender, would lead her not to the throne of the empire, but to martyrdom and glory. It was a moonless night, and an unusual silence stretched over Rome, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Flavia, wrapped in a dark cloak that concealed her golden hair, slowly descended the carved stone steps leading to the catacombs of the Via Ardeatina. Beside her, Priscilla held a trembling lamp. Their shadows slid across the damp walls, like ghosts from another time. Down there, where the martyrs slept their nameless sleep, a new life was about to begin. The small group waiting at the end of the passage received her with respectful reverence. Among them were Nereo and Aquila, two former soldiers who, upon learning of Christ, had abandoned the service of arms to dedicate themselves to the gospel. Their presence was strong yet serene. Their faces showed the peace of those who no longer fear death. "Are you sure, sister?" Nereo asked, his voice deep. Flavia nodded. She did not tremble. In her eyes shone a certainty that had slowly matured in the silence of her soul. "I wish to die to the world," she responded, "and live only for him." A sacred silence enveloped the funeral chamber turned chapel. On a carved stone, a pitcher of water and an old wooden cross were the only adornments. Priscilla placed the lamp next to the wall, and the faint light cast a halo over Flavia's face as she removed her cloak and stood dressed in a simple white tunic, as plain as the faith she embraced. Nereo took the pitcher with firm hands and began to pray. "Flavia Domitila, servant of the Most High, do you renounce the prince of this world and his works?" "I renounce," she replied without hesitation. Do you believe in Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, who was crucified, died, and was buried, and on the third day rose again to eternal life?" "I believe," said Flavia, and her voice resonated through the walls with the strength of one who surrenders completely. Then Nerio poured the water over her head once, twice, 3 times, and spoke the sacred words, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." The water ran down her face like a silent river, and with it seemed to depart all fears, doubts, and masks. When she opened her eyes, Flavia was no longer a Roman lady. She was Christian, and her soul, light as the fragrance of spikenard, ascended toward a love that could not be explained with human words. That night, the soft chant of a psalm filled the catacombs as the new brothers and sisters came forward to embrace her one by one. In that circle of stone and faith, Flavia found more truth than in all the palaces where she had once lived. On her way back home, she walked without looking back. The echoes of the Palatine, the feasts of the Senate, and the splendor of the empire were no longer her world. Within her, a flame had been lit, and that flame was not of this world. From that day forward, her life became a delicate balance between duty and secret mission. In the court, she continued to be the wife of Consul Tito Flavio Clemente, who, under the serene influence of his wife, began to take an interest in the teachings of Jesus, at first with skepticism, then with desire, and finally with faith. The two would walk through the gardens pretending to discuss state matters, when in fact they discussed Paul's letters. "What if Caesar finds out?" Clemente asked one afternoon, looking at the statues surrounding them. "Let him know," Flavia responded, not taking her eyes off the sky. "But let him find us firm." In secret, Clemente was baptized by Nerio in the same crypt where his wife had been reborn. Together they began to welcome other converts, senators, slaves, women from the temple, and former soldiers. Their home, once a reflection of imperial grandeur, became a living network of prayer and aid to the poor. From their position of power, Flavia and Clemente silently wove the threads of a clandestine church. And while new statues of Caesar Domitian rose in the streets of Rome, in the hearts of his subjects began to emerge a certainty stronger than any decree. The certainty that there was a kingdom where power was not gold, but mercy, a kingdom to which a patrician woman with the blood of emperors had joined out of love, a kingdom for which, if necessary, she was willing to die. Rome was uneasy. Something invisible stirred beneath its columns, like a murmur winding through the stones of the Forum and the shadows of the Colosseum. It was the year 95 AD. Domitian, son of the late Vespasian, had consolidated his power with an iron fist. In every corner of the empire, his busts rose with the inscription, "Dominus et Deus," Lord and God. He was not satisfied with ruling. He wanted to be worshipped. And anyone who didn't comply would not live. The Flavian palace gleamed with more pomp than ever, but within its walls tension could be cut with a knife. Flavia Domitila, now more serene than in her younger years, knew that her life hung by a thread. The number of Christians was growing, and with it, Caesar's suspicions. Domitian, consumed by his paranoia, had started sending spies to the homes of the nobles, looking for signs of treason, heresy, or faith. One morning, while the fog of the Tiber still lingered over the imperial gardens, Flavia was called to the presence of Domitian himself. She entered the throne room with firm steps. She wore a simple tunic without jewels, without ceremonial hairstyles. Only the cross embroidered on the hem of her dress spoke for her, discreet but unbreakable. The emperor received her standing, accompanied by his prefect of the Praetorian Guard. His face, carved by hatred and fear, was a mask of control. "Niece," he said, almost with venomous sweetness, "it is said that in your house the family rites are no longer celebrated, that the libations to Jupiter have ceased. that you no longer make sacrifices for my health. Can you explain why?" Flavia kept her gaze steady, not defying but not lowering her eyes either. "Because I pray for you to the only God who can save, uncle. And to him, incense and animals are not offered, but the heart." A murmur passed through the room. The prefect looked at her as if she were already dead. "Do you dare to tell me," Domitian insisted, "that your God is superior to mine? That I am not worthy of worship?" "You are my emperor," Flavia said clearly, "but you are not my God." Domitian looked at her in silence like a hunter measuring his prey. Then, in a cold voice, he sentenced, "Your husband will be interrogated, your wealth confiscated, and you exiled, unless you make a small sacrifice in my honor, just one, a drop of wine, a pinch of incense, a gesture. Is that so difficult for a daughter of the empire?" Flavia took a step forward, her face devoid of hatred, only filled with a peace that no one in that room could understand. "I would rather lose the earth than lose the heaven." That same night, Tito Flavio Clemente was arrested in the Senate, tried and executed for atheism, the new euphemism the empire used to name Christians. His name was erased from the official lists, his statues torn down, his family disgraced, and Flavia was sent into exile. But it was not just any exile. Domitian sought to humiliate her, to strip her of her lineage, to reduce her to nothing. She was taken to the Pontine Islands, a rocky and desolate archipelago off the coast of Terracina. There, between cliffs battered by the briny wind, it was expected that she would die slowly from neglect and despair. She did not die. In Ponza, amidst caves and ruins, Flavia found a new mission. She was no longer the lady of a domus, but a sister to the other exiles who shared her banishment. Women accused of adultery, rebellious slaves, old soldiers fallen from grace. Among them were Nereo and Aquila, the faithful brothers who had also been cast into oblivion. "Did they think they would extinguish us?" Flavia said one night as she lit an oil lamp in a cave. "They didn't know that the light shines brighter in the darkness." On that hostile island, a new community emerged. They prayed on the rock, celebrated the Eucharist with dry bread and wild grape wine. They healed wounds, comforted the desperate, and wrote hidden letters between cloths, which were later carried to Rome by faithful fishermen. Flavia's words became a consolation for the persecuted, and her exile turned into an altar. "Let Rome know," she said, "that the blood of the just is not erased by decrees. Let Caesar know that the throne of Christ does not waver when a crown falls." In her stone cell, under the open sky, Flavia Domitila did not fade. She transformed, and the empire, unknowingly, had just forged with its hatred one of the firmest pillars of the burgeoning church. The waves of the Tyrrhenian Sea relentlessly struck the shores of the island of Ponza, as if trying to tear it from the face of the sea. There, amidst the harsh rocks and the relentless wind, what had once been a lady of imperial gardens had now become the mother of a community of the forgotten. No silks, no servants, just a simple wool tunic, the echo of the gospel, and the unshakable certainty that the kingdom of heaven also dwelled in the caves. Flavia now lived in a cave overlooking the coast, where seagulls perched without fear, and the pilgrims of faith found refuge. Around her, the island had begun to transform. What had once been a prison now breathed hope. There were Nereo and Aquila, her brothers in faith, who discreetly organized prayers and sustenance for the community. There were also women cast out by society, whom Flavia taught not to surrender, but to look to the sky with dignity. Each evening, as the sun descended behind the sea and painted the horizon with copper and blood, Flavia would sit by the entrance of her cave with a wax tablet on her lap. By the flickering light of a torch, she wrote letters that were later entrusted to faithful hands. These were letters to the Christians in Rome, to the persecuted in Asia Minor, to the brothers suffering in silence. They were not theological treatises, nor doctrinal speeches. They were words of comfort, strength, and tenderness, words born not from power, but from shared pain. "Do not weep for what we have lost," she wrote. "For what the world takes from us, God transforms into the seed of eternity." One of those nights, while writing under the whisper of the sea, a young woman, exiled for refusing to serve in the temple of Cybele, approached her. Her eyes were red from weeping, and her voice barely a broken thread. "I do not understand, lady. Why does God allow this abandonment?" Flavia looked up, setting aside the tablet. She looked at her with tenderness, like a mother who knows all wounds without having seen them. "Abandonment," she replied, "is not from God but from the world. He is here now, with you, in this very moment. Do you not see him in the comfort of this community? Do you not feel him in the embrace of one who has nothing? God does not withdraw. He disguises himself as pain to teach us true love." The young woman fell to her knees and broke into sobs. Flavia embraced her without saying more, letting the night do its sacred work in the broken soul. The community in Ponza grew, not in numbers but in fervor. Each new day was celebrated as a gift, each shared piece of bread as a miracle. The vigils were long, made of whispered psalms, discreet tears, and a chant that Flavia had composed during her first winter on the island. It went like this: "You who make the wind your messenger and fire your servant, enter my exile and make it your dwelling. You who see the just in their solitude, feed their lamp with the oil of your glory." One day, among the stream of letters that left the island, one found its way into the hands of a Roman widow, a devout believer and patron of Christianity in secret. Her name was Plautina, and upon reading Flavia's words, she felt that she could no longer remain silent. She began to discreetly spread Flavia's writings, copying them by hand, reading them at night meetings with Christians hiding in the catacombs. Thus, without an army or sword, Flavia returned to Rome. She returned in the form of words, of comfort, of example. Her figure, an exiled shadow, began to shine like a beacon for the persecuted. Some said her writings contained wisdom worthy of the prophets. Others simply called them the letters of the mother. Meanwhile, on the island, persecution did not cease. Caesar's agents continued to send emissaries to verify that the exiles were not conspiring. One afternoon, a new official disembarked on the coast, his brow furrowed and a sword hanging from his belt. His name was Maximus. He had seen many wars, many deaths. He believed in neither gods nor men. "Are you Flavia Domitila?" he asked in a harsh tone when he saw her. "I am," she responded without fear, holding his gaze. "They say you write to those in Rome, that you speak of an invisible kingdom. Would you dare tell me why?" Flavia smiled slightly, as though offering a cup of water to the thirsty. "Because there are things that neither steel nor Caesar can kill, and one of them is hope." Maximus did not answer. He simply observed her for a long while in silence. Then he turned and disappeared among the rocks. But as he left, he dropped a small bag of dry bread near the cave, and no one ever saw him again. Such was Flavia's prison. No bars, but with surveillance. No chains, but with the threat of death. And yet, day after day, night after night, this prison continued to transform into an altar. Because where there is a woman who loves, who consoles, who teaches, there, although no one sees it, is already present the God who reigns without a scepter and who conquers without violence. Winter slowly retreated from the Pontine Islands, and the first breezes of spring brought with them omens more bitter than sweet. One morning, as Flavia collected rainwater in a clay bowl, a sentry appeared before the cave with a sealed scroll. The soldier's face was pale, as if he did not fully understand the order he carried. "Flavia Domitila," he said in a low voice, avoiding her gaze. "The Emperor has ordered your transfer to Rome. Immediately." For a moment, the wind seemed to stop. Flavia slowly lowered the bowl and nodded calmly. She did not ask. She did not protest. She knew that the times of the Caesar were not the times of the Lord, but both converged when martyrdom was near. She said silent farewells to her sisters in exile, embracing them without words. Nerio and Aquila accompanied her to the pier, their faces serene, their lips murmuring psalms. The journey to Rome was long and silent. The transport ship sailed along the coast of Latium, and every wave that struck the hull seemed to announce the end of a season of grace. Upon reaching the harbor, Flavia was not greeted with cheers or by family, only a group of praetorians armed with stone faces. They escorted her through back streets to the outskirts of the city, where a place awaited her that few returned from alive, the prison of Terracina. There, in an underground complex, damp and devoid of light, they locked her away alone. The dungeon smelled of mold and dry blood. But Flavia was not afraid. She knelt on the bare stone and prayed. "Lord, if this is my cross, let it be light because you carry it with me. If this is my altar, consecrate it with your presence." Days later, she was brought before a secret tribunal. It was not the Senate nor the Forum. It was a council of shadows, presided over by a legate of Domitian who did not mention her name. He only asked, "Are you willing to offer incense to the genius of Caesar?" "I offer my soul to the living God. I have no other worship." "Do you publicly reject your Christian faith?" "I proclaim it with my life." "Do you insist on denying the divinity of the emperor?" "I insist that there is only one Lord, and he does not wear a crown of gold, but one of thorns." The interrogation ended without the need for a formal sentence. Her fate had already been sealed. Over the following weeks, Flavia was subjected to strict confinement. They prohibited her from writing, withheld food for days, interrogated her relentlessly, and forced her into silence and darkness. But each night, between the stones of her cell, she prayed. And sometimes, the guards said they could hear hymns in Latin, as if hidden angels were repeating the Psalms with her. One of these guards, a young man named Elio, began to spy on her secretly. Not out of duty, but for something deeper he did not understand. One night, he opened the peephole of the door and saw Flavia on her knees, her hands extended towards the wall, her lips murmuring words of peace. "Why don't you hate?" he asked, without thinking. Flavia turned gently, her eyes shining in the dim light. "Because hatred is a weight that prevents one from flying, and I want to rise to where my spouse is." Elio did not respond, but the next day, he left a flower on the stone where she slept. Meanwhile, in Rome, rumors about her return spread secretly. Christians once again spoke her name in the catacombs. They said that the lioness of Ponza had returned, that the still-living martyr resisted like a torch in the dungeon, and among the hidden houses of the faithful, lamps were lit in her honor. In Flavia's cell, however, time had no face, only Christ's, and every day upon waking she murmured, "I am closer, Lord, closer than yesterday." One night she dreamed she was walking through the gardens of the Palatine, but they were no longer made of marble. They were of humble earth, watered by the blood of witnesses. And in the center of the garden, a shining lamb smiled at her with tenderness. Upon waking, she knew the cross was near, and she did not fear, for at last she was returning home. The dawn had not yet painted the roofs of Terracina with gold when the doors of Flavia Domitila's dungeon creaked open. Two soldiers, wrapped in gray cloaks, entered without a word. Flavia, already awake for hours, looked at them calmly. They did not need to speak. Their eyes already carried the news that her heart had known for some time. "It is time, madam," whispered one of them, the younger one, the same one who had left her a flower weeks earlier. Flavia slowly stood. She smoothed her tunic with dignity, took her white veil, already worn by the days, and placed it over her head with the gentleness of one preparing for a feast, not for death. She was silently escorted out of the prison. No one insulted her. No one shouted. Even the air seemed to hold its breath at the solemnity of this figure who, walking between the stone walls, radiated a serene light that could not be extinguished. With every step, her soul detached from the world with increasing lightness. She wore no chains. She needed no guard. Her freedom was already complete. The place of execution was not the Colosseum nor the circus. Domitian, fearing public veneration, had ordered it to be done in secret, in a crypt outside the walls of Rome, where the world could not see it, where history might think it forgotten. But the angels and the righteous would see her. Upon arrival, she found Nerio and Aquila, who would also be executed that day. Their faces showed no fear, only an ancient peace, the kind that comes from knowing one is already in the presence of the Most High. "Sister," said Aquila, slightly bowing his head, "we have kept the faith. We have run the race. The crown awaits us." Flavia smiled. Her eyes shone as though they already saw the invisible. "Then let not our voices tremble. Let the world hear what neither marble nor power can bury." The three were led into an underground chamber carved into the rock. There, according to the imperial order, they would be buried alive, a sentence reserved for those of noble blood who defied the Caesar without wielding a sword. The soldiers, following orders, did not utter insults. They simply sealed the heavy stone slab behind them, blocking the entrance to light. The darkness was immediate, the air damp, the silence total. Then Flavia spoke, "Let us sing." And in that living tomb a hymn began, not a cry of despair, but a song of hope. With a firm voice, Flavia began chanting the words of the psalms she had learned as a child, but which she now understood fully. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters and restores my soul." Nerio and Aquila joined her. Their voices, united in the gloom, were like invisible fire rising to heaven. Death did not come with violence. It came like a dream. The oxygen grew scarce, the singing faded, the knees bent, and the lips, still murmuring prayers, silenced one by one. When the last word was spoken, when the last tear rolled over the stone, Flavia's soul ascended. And in her ascent, the history of Rome changed forever. The soldiers covered the entrance with earth and rubble. But one of them, Elio, the young man who had heard her pray, did not move. He fell to his knees in front of the sealed spot, his eyes fixed on the stone. "It was not a crime," he whispered. "It was an offering." And in secret he marked the rock with a sign that only Christians would understand. A cross. Days passed, then years, but the place was never forgotten. Elio, now a disciple, guided others to the tomb. There, in silence, they began to gather, to pray, to remember. Thus was born the cult of Saint Flavia Domitila, not by decree of emperors, but by the testimony of those who saw in her death a seed. And that seed, buried with her in the rock, germinated in the faith of entire generations, bearing fruit even centuries later. She, who had everything, gave everything. She who could have ruled chose to serve. She who could have stayed silent spoke with her blood. And God, who does not forget his own, crowned her forever as a martyr, bride, and mother of the new kingdom. Rome continued to turn. Crowns changed hands. Domitian fell, betrayed by his own, and his name was erased from the walls of the Senate. Other Caesars took the throne, and the city once again donned its robes of gold and marble. But among the Christians, those who gathered in the shadows, in crypts, in cemeteries, and in empty wells, the name of Flavia Domitila began to pass from mouth to mouth like a flame that could not be extinguished. There were no portraits of her, no statues remained. But where there had been silence, there was now testimony. And where there had been darkness, now there was light. In the catacomb of Domitila, beneath the Via Ardeatina, men and women of all ranks began to gather to pray. There, hidden among winding tunnels, were the tombs of Nereo, of Aquiles, and hers. No one knew how her body had come there. Some said that the Christians, led by a man named Elio, had secretly recovered it after the fall of Domitian. Others believed an angel had guided it to its final resting place. In any case, her tomb became a beacon, not of pain, but of resurrection. Roman women who had known Flavia at court, and even those who had only heard of her in whispers of faith, began to invoke her as a model of self-sacrifice. Priscilla, now elderly, organized the vigils from a quiet corner, softly recalling the words of the emperor's niece who had once renounced everything for Christ. She did not flee from her cross, she would say. She embraced it, and she taught us that martyrdom is not a defeat. It is an invisible victory. Over the years, the catacombs were expanded. Cave paintings began to appear on the walls. The image of a woman with arms open to the sky, dressed in white, surrounded by palm branches. No one wrote her name. It was unnecessary. Everyone knew who she was. And not only in Rome, in the farthest provinces of the empire, they spoke of a noblewoman who had abandoned her throne to kneel before the god of slaves. In Hispania, in Africa, in Gaul, bishops mentioned her name in their offices. Her story inspired consecrated virgins, at-risk catechumens, converted soldiers. Her legacy spread silently, without proclamations, without public triumphs. But like the roots of a centuries-old tree, it grew underground, nurturing generations of faith. A century later, Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity. Rome opened its eyes to the cross. And when the new order sought to honor its martyrs, the name of Saint Flavia Domitila was inscribed in the liturgies, not as a noblewoman, but as a faithful witness. A basilica was built over the catacombs that bore her name. And there, pilgrims came with tears, with oil lamps, with children in their arms, and promises in their hearts. But beyond temples or reliquaries, her true inheritance was engraved in the soul of the Church. In every woman who renounced the world for eternal love, in every young person who dared to believe beyond the sword, in every Christian who, with her, said, "My kingdom is not of this world." Flavia's legacy was not shouted. It was whispered into the souls of the humble, sung in the psalms of dawn, woven into the tears of the mothers of martyrs. And so it continues today. When the world forgets what it cannot control, heaven remembers what was faithful. And in the eternal vault where the true crowns shine, her name shines, not as a princess of the empire, but as a daughter of the Most High, martyr, saint, and witness of the hope that never dies. The empire fell. The Caesars became dust. The columns of the Palatine crumbled under the weight of centuries, and the golden eagles disappeared from the standard of Rome. But beneath those ruins, something bloomed that marble could not hold and time could not destroy. The eternal fragrance of a rose born among thorns. Flavia Domitila, a woman of imperial blood, exiled, a martyr, left no codices or treatises. Her inheritance is not in libraries or monuments. Her legacy is in the flame she planted quietly, deep in the heart of the Church. A flame that continues to burn in every soul that chooses to renounce power for truth, in every gaze that rises toward the heavens with pure faith, in every yes spoken in the darkness of the world. For centuries, her story was told by the light of oil lamps, whispered in catacombs, and remembered in secret liturgies. But heaven, that heaven she aspired to without fanfare, does not need historians. There, her name is written in letters of light, alongside those of Nereo and Achilles, her brothers in death. And there, among invisible choirs, she still sings her hymn. Flavia was not a rebel. She was not a revolutionary. She was something more dangerous to the thrones of this world. A woman free in God. A woman who, holding the world in her hands, let it fall for a kingdom that cannot be bought, negotiated, or corrupted. A kingdom that is found when one is willing to lose everything for love. And for this reason, her death was a seed, her silence a proclamation, her cross a crown. Today, when the name of Domitila is spoken in the liturgy of the saints, it does not echo with nobility, but with the sacred tremor of those who have conquered without a sword. Her life reminds us that holiness is not always manifested in visible miracles, but in unwavering faith in what is hidden. For in a world that changes faces with every generation, there are truths that remain, and among them is this: love offered without measure never dies. Saint Flavia Domitila, Rose of the Flavii, Martyr of the Faith, Daughter of the Empire and Wife of Christ, pray for us.